Hi, everyone. And so we've gone through week one, which focused primarily on the scientific attempts to understand um, consciousness and its evolution. And this video is to introduce the second week. So we're not, at this point, going to totally abandon science. We never totally abandon science, but we're going to stick close to it, but also branch out, particularly in thinking about the idea that consciousness may have evolved. Because if we can't understand consciousness itself, then perhaps an understanding or a view on how consciousness changes over time will give us more of an idea about what this thing is. And at any rate, in and of itself, understanding how consciousness evolved is clearly would be a very important thing to elucidate. Now, part of the reason for this video, part of its assumptions, underlying assumptions, is that we in the first week saw that if we're going to try to understand consciousness objectively, we're going to fail. And that's the source, in a way, of this inability to pin consciousness down, is that we're trying to develop a concrete, rational view of what it is and how it is, and that runs us right into a problem that we can't get past. So, and that's because we're trying to understand it rationally and objectively in scientific ways. Such a way understands things by breaking them down into parts. So you will then try to understand consciousness by looking at its characteristics and separating those out and categorizing those, and it doesn't ever lead you to what this thing is, this ability to be aware, to experience. It doesn't lead you to that. It never produces that, because this dividing, categorization and analysis can't get you there. So we need an approach that's taking account of something more holistic, but also is what we might call subjective. Because the one thing we know about consciousness is that it leads to first-person experience. So the subjective, of course, then needs to be brought in to this process of looking at consciousness. And we're going to start here. But one of the things, if one of the main aspects of consciousness is this very subjectivity that we have, this inner world, this inner sense of things, then it might then become apparent to us that this inner awareness, this inner subjectivity, hasn't always been the same, that it's actually developed over time in our culture and species, and indeed in ourselves over our lifetimes, from being a baby to maturity, and now that this inner experience, this inner awareness, has changed in character over time, and that we could call the evolution of consciousness then. So, of course, this inner subjectivity, this inner world, is responsible for a lot of things exteriorly in our world, in the exterior world, such as this inner world is the thing that's given rise to art and literature and architecture and music, have come from within, if you like. We may not know where they ultimately come from, but they've come from within it. That these things in our culture and society reflect something about the inner state, this inner world that we have. So that if we were to look back over time at the expressions of this inner world via art and literature and all kinds of things, that we might then be able to tease out how the inner world has changed with time, how it's evolved. And later in the course, we'll do the same thing with language, because this obviously great literature is the use of language, and the use of language has clearly changed over the last few millennia. And so then language, being an expression of consciousness, then might give us a clue into how consciousness has changed over time, and indeed even to the nature of that consciousness. So here then we're going to start, well, staying close to neuroscience, or somewhat close to neuroscience, but we're going to bring in this added element of the history of consciousness as it's revealed through the great works of humanity, human beings, basically, which then reveal something about this inner state, the subjective state that we're hypothesizing here is perhaps the primary characteristic of what consciousness does, is it creates this inner state. We have it. We're not robots where there's a blank. There's a world in there. So how has that world changed over time? So that's what we're here going to start looking at here. But we're going to start from a somewhat neuroscience perspective, looking at aspects of the brain that have not been really explained, and there's one glaring aspect of the brain that's never been explained, which is why it has two halves, and there's a left brain and a right brain with this small bridge joining the two. The corpus callosum joins the two sides of the brain. Why is it divided into two parts? And so in a sense, we know perhaps from experiments where this corpus callosum is cut. They used to do that for people who had epileptic fits and stuff. But that what happens then is you really, what is revealed is there's kind of two of us in there, in a way, with slightly but significantly different perspectives on the world. And so that's a very interesting thing to notice as an element of consciousness and its association to the brain. So then part of this inner world then is this aspect of there being sort of two of us in there, if you see what I mean. We're a little bit schizophrenic, but usually these two sides are integrated in some way, and that's a big question, is how these two sort of sides of the brain are integrated. And we're going to look at that this week. More on that in a minute. So we're going to look at two actually opposing views of what's happened with this sort of divided self, divided mind view of looking at human beings. Starting out with these views have been produced by scientists and have been produced from an evidence basis. So they are somewhat scientific views, but they've also taken into account a sort of a look at aspects of the expressions of our culture over many thousands of years, basically, as sort of evidence in what's happening with our subjective self, and in particular with this sort of divided mind. And the first one is a famous work that's called the Origin of Consciousness in the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. And I wouldn't say that it's a mainstream scientific theory, but it when it came out in the 70s, it created a lot of disturbance. Created, and it's definitely a known theory that that many ascribe to, actually. Um, and so that is one view that we'll look at. It's not a view that I happen personally to agree with, although I think it's creative and it has some interesting insights. And then the opposing view, which is literally an opposing view. I mean, he thinks is by Ian McGilchrist, who thinks that that in the bicameral mind theory, he came to diametrically wrong conclusion. But we'll look at both of them, both of these perspectives, and we can see what we think. But in either way, it sort of introduces us to this realm of looking at consciousness as it has expressed itself through our own evolution, particularly over recorded history, I would say, and then sort of making conclusions that relate to characteristics coming from neuroscience based on looking at that history. And that gets us into this territory. We're sort of dipping our toe into this territory, which we'll get into more deeply the following week with Ken Wilber, who's going to be essentially doing the same, although from a very different kind of philosophical basis, and then on into Edgar Cayce and Rudolf Steiner and others, where we're really looking at this from a different, a kind of different form of knowing or information gathering, which is mostly spiritual, I would say. But what we'll notice, I think, is that there are some really interesting parallels that will come out between all of these approaches to looking at our history. Once the subjective side of ourselves is brought in, there's a very interesting kind of sort of coming together that we might sort of see, such that we could almost produce by the end of the course a kind of our own version, a kind of theory or view of the evolution of consciousness from a synthesis of all these approaches. But we'll see if that's true or not. You'll see if that's true or not. So anyway, we're starting here with the breakdown of the bicameral mind. I've had to choose. These subjects are extremely dense, and when you have a book, this one by Ian McGilchrist is very thick. It has 500 pages in it or something. This is very dense material, a lot of evidence, a lot of backup, a lot of ideas and processing of data exists in these books. And so it's not an easy one to present to you so that you get a good idea of it in a week. So I'm going to try and use summaries of these works to present them to you. And hopefully we'll grasp the main features of both of these two theories, during the time we have. I'm sorry we can't go into depth into the original works, because it's probably worth doing. But we'll try and sort of skim across the top, but get the essential elements of both of the ideas, the depth of both the ideas during this week. And then we'll be in a position to make our minds up about the two theories if we want to, and then move on to study Ken Wilber and sort of see if that brings any more light to the table about this thing called consciousness and its evolution. Okay, look forward to talking to you all this week. Okay, bye.